Hi, folks. My name is Khadine Bennett. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Intergovernmental Affairs here at the ACLU of Illinois. Thanks for making time to join today's town hall on the future of policing and criminal justice in Illinois, specifically as it relates to the Illinois legislature and opportunities that we are hoping to get for meaningful change. We wanted to acknowledge that unfortunately we won't have live captioning available at tonight's event as anticipated. The writer was unable to attend, and you have our sincere apologies for any issues this may have caused. The recording will have captioning and can be found on the event page on our website, as well as our YouTube channel next week. We've had tons of questions in advance that has helped to shape our discussion. We've also received your wish list priority areas for policing and criminal justice reform. If you didn't share your list or you want to ask a question, please share them in the chat. You can also email them to events@aclu-il.org, and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible. If you've been to our town halls, you know that we love to ask poll questions throughout the event, so please keep an eye out for them on your screen. They reflect some of our ACLU of Illinois legislative priorities and some of the priorities that we've heard from you about these issues. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, we encourage you to leave your reaction to the poll questions in the comments. And if you would like links to anything we've talked about today, you can email us at events@aclu-il.org. And throughout the event, Kayla is going to be dropping some gems in the chat box. So tonight we will be in conversation with three folks who have and continue to be leaders in conversations around criminal justice and policing. And it is a miracle that they're all here today because they're all very, very busy people. I'd like to welcome Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, who has been a champion of justice issues during her time in the General Assembly. And she continues to be a champion in all of her roles, including her leadership of the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative. And you could find her detailed bio in the chat. We also have Senator Elgie who's the chair of the Senate Criminal Committee and leader on criminal justice and policing reform issues. And he's a frequent co-sponsor of these types of bills, as is Representative Justin Slaughter, who serves as the chair of the House Criminal Committee. So we have some of the best and the brightest today. Bios are in the chat. We invited these folks to join us tonight because they have been heavily involved in conversations along with some of their colleagues about the response to the call for bold, transformative policing and criminal justice reform. Folks are talk about the awakening that has happened for part of our society this summer. People call it an uprising, a movement for social justice. And so much of it has been centered on protests of the killing of folks of color, especially Black folks, at the hands of law enforcement. And with COVID, there's been more conversations about the number of people in our prisons and jails, leading to more folks calling for reducing the prison population and also abolition of the prison and policing systems. So I'm going to start with Senator Sims and Rep. Slaughter. This summer, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus laid out a policy agenda that included policing and criminal justice reform, among other things, as priorities for the caucus. Can you talk a little bit about why we need to reform these systems and what are the areas that are of these issues? What are the priority areas for the caucus?
Absolutely. Thank you, Khadine, and thank you to the ACLU of Illinois for hosting this, and to all of you for participating this evening. As we move forward in these discussions, the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus looked at this through the lens of reimagining our justice system. And by that, I mean looking at the not just the pandemic of COVID-19, but the pandemic of 1619 and how that has created a system that has locked individuals into a condition and out of opportunity for generations. So as we have tried to move forward with this discussion, we've not just looked at it only from criminal justice, through the criminal justice system, but we've looked at it from all parts of the lack of opportunities which exist in our community. So criminal justice is the area where when there's a lack of opportunity on the front end, so in our educational system, or a lack of economic opportunities, or lack of addressing substance use disorders, or mental health issues, those show up in the criminal justice system. So we want a criminal justice system that is more fair, that does not push people into and does not incarcerate people simply because they are poor or they have a condition that is an illness, but it addresses those illnesses. So, and then additionally, in addition to that, creating a system where law enforcement works with communities, does not occupy, does not challenge, but works collaboratively with communities to make sure that we have outcomes that are good for communities. That is the crux of this discussion. We want a fairness across the board. We want to make sure that when a person of color sees a person in law enforcement, they see someone who's their partner. And when law enforcement sees a person in the community, they see someone who they represent and they work for, and not someone they are charged with occupying or controlling, because that is not the relationship that should exist.
Great, thank you. Rep. Slaughter?
Yeah, that's right, and good evening, everyone. Just want to thank ACLU for having us on, and for your steadfast dedication and commitment to criminal justice reform. Just building on what Senator Sims said, I think initially a lot of the discussions were maybe solely about criminal justice reform, but when we started to really take a deep dive into what were all of the many holistic factors that went into criminal justice reform, and looking at our neighborhoods, looking at our communities, especially in particular the Black community, you begin to see the disproportionate impact that the lack of education, high unemployment, also our public health policies are having in conjunction with criminal justice reform. And one of the things that all of us on the panel really prioritize is actually looking at the data, looking at the numbers. When you look at a state here where we've got routinely over 40,000 individuals, of course our numbers are down, but over the years we've averaged 40,000 individuals in the Department of Corrections, over 20,000 folks that are in the community on mandatory supervised release. If you look at the over-sentencing of individuals, over 6,000 individuals in the Department of Corrections with over 30-year plus sentences, over 3,000 individuals in our system that have over 50 plus year sentences. We wanted to delve into what it meant to reimagine our system, whether that was sentencing reform, police accountability, and also reducing violence. We thought that would be a comprehensive, more holistic approach to addressing these disparities and quite frankly, addressing racism in our criminal justice system. So, we all of it is on the table: eliminating cash bail, eliminating penalty enhancements and mandatory minimums, giving credit for time served in regards to truth in sentencing, limiting time on mandatory supervised release, and then also looking at it internally, something that Lieutenant Governor Stratton is doing. How do we interagency-wise look at what we're doing to provide opportunities as it relates to returning citizens and those that have been touched by our system? So we want to take a comprehensive approach. This is not just about criminal justice reform. Of course, you're hearing about the other pillars that we've embarked upon: education, employment opportunity, and then also public health as well.
Great, thank you. Lieutenant Governor Stratton, this fall, the Pritzker administration issued a press release that identified policing and criminal justice principles and your commitment to working with the legislature, specifically the Black Caucus, to advance those. Can you share those principles? And similar to the question I asked Rep. Slaughter and Senator Sims, why these particular principles, why policing and criminal justice now?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you, Khadine, for the invitation to be here to the ACLU of Illinois for hosting this really important conversation. I should also note that my pronouns are she, her, hers. I also want to say how excited I am to be with my two good friends, is Senator Elgie Sims and Representative Justin Slaughter. We all sat in the same row in the House of Representatives, and I'm always glad, thankful for their leadership and glad to be in this conversation, and as well as thankful for the incredible leadership of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus on all of these issues during this really important time. So let me just say that the principles that the governor and I announced recently are not new principles. They're not new for us. Earlier in 2020, time is kind of melding together, but we had the rollout of our Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative, and at that time we were able to talk about here are some of the things that we are going to be working on. And in fact, Governor Pritzker and I, before we were governor and lieutenant governor, campaigned on these same criminal justice reform principles, knowing that we had to do something different in the state of Illinois. So let me get to your question about the what and the why in these 7 principles that have been released. The first principle is on bail reform. We know that the great writer James Baldwin once said how incredibly expensive it is to be poor. And we have to stop criminalizing poverty. I have spent my time as lieutenant governor and even before traveling around the state, meeting with people who are being detained pre-trial, visiting to our jails. And there are people that for $200 or $300 in bail, they could not get out because they just don't have it. This is prejudging people. It is punishing people who are being detained pre-trial and have not been convicted. And it has nothing to do with necessarily being a danger to society. It is really about the fact that people simply can't afford it. So we need to end cash bail and really move in a different direction. The second principle is about modernizing our drug and theft laws. And we know that too often these crimes, kind of going back to the bail reform around poverty, oftentimes these crimes are a misguided attempt to get out of poverty, or it's directly correlated to communities that have suffered decades of disinvestment. So this is disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities that are being overly punished in our state. And so we need to review our laws to make sure that we're not out of step with the rest of the country. The third and fourth principles really focus on excessive sentencing and reentry services. And I see these as going really hand in hand. For those of you who know me, I believe in rehabilitation. I believe that people can change, but over the years, we've had these sentencing laws that have gotten longer and our prison population has only exploded. And so we know that longer sentences don't necessarily improve public safety. It does not mean because people are in prison longer that means our communities are safer. And in fact, we can see that day after day. Safety and healthy communities comes when people have access to healthcare and housing and nutritious food and green spaces and educational and employment opportunities. So we have to think about how do we shift this focus from longer sentencing to opportunities for rehabilitation. And then finally, our fifth, sixth, and seventh principles are really about one of the greatest civil rights issues of our time, and that is police reform. We know that we must move ahead with making sure that we bring forth some legislation that holds police accountable. We have seen an entire summer where people, not just across the state of Illinois, but across this country and every one of our 50 states and across the globe, have been crying out for racial justice, and specifically in the area of police reform in the wakes of the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others. So we need greater transparency. We need policy reforms such as changing use of force standards and some of the things that the senator and the representative have already mentioned. So the time is now, and Governor Pritzker and I certainly look forward to working alongside of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus to make sure that we can push this forward.
That's great. And one of the questions we got asked the most is like, what specific issues are on the table for policing and criminal justice reform? And people were really, they're saying, we want bold reform. What does that really look like in Illinois? So I know you all have shared some of those specific policies. Does anybody want to add to what's on the table? Senator Sims?
Sure, I will add, the discussions of licensing of police officers. I'm as it mentions in the chat, my bio, I'm an attorney, so I am licensed. But you know who else is licensed? Barbers are licensed, and estheticians are licensed. If they can be licensed, why are law enforcement officers not licensed? But we have had today the Senate's Criminal Law Committee our Special Committee on Public Safety and the House Judiciary Criminal Committee held a hearing, which we have done over a number of these topics. And we've talked about these issues, but a number of issues related to police reform. So one was licensing, another includes body cameras, which we talked about today. I sponsored the original bill to allow for body cameras here in the state of Illinois. And what we are finding is there needs to be updates to that law, and that's because there are some departments where the law is not being used as effectively as it was intended when we originally passed it. So we are working to update the law related to body cameras. But then I've got to stop for a moment, Khadine, and then hone in on this use of force policy. What we are finding is there is a patchwork of use of force policies throughout the state of Illinois, from department to department. And if there were a statewide standard, we would know from one department to the next what those policies are, and that policy will be driven from the state, not from each individual department. And why is that important? That's important because as we go from one department to another, from one municipality to another, the standards are very different. And what we are trying to do is make the process simple for the public to understand what the rules that the law enforcement who is engaging them is playing by. So we want to make this process more effective for the public and more transparent for the public, because law enforcement is really there to protect and serve them. And that's what we want from this process.
So this is a good time for our first poll question as we transition to policing. So for folks in our virtual audience, can you rate how important this reform is to you? You're going to see it pop up in a little bit. So the reform is limit when police officers can use force, including banning force that limits a person's ability to breathe, and law enforcement use of tear gas and projectiles during protests and crowd control. So it's 1 to 5. 1 is less important, 2 somewhat important, 3 fairly important, 4 very important, and 5 most important. So rate how important it is, hit submit, and then we will get the results of the poll very soon. While we're up, 56% most important, 42% very important, 2% somewhat, 1% less important. I'll take those numbers. That's awesome. Okay, so Senator Sims and Rep. Slaughter, I think you were in the General Assembly 5 years ago. It felt like we were at this place. It was after a summer and fall of Black men being killed by police officers, and there was a push to do reform in the General Assembly. And I know that there was a lot of work that was done to build a foundation from which we're going to hopefully use that to build. How is the approach to policing reform that you took 5 years ago different from the approach you're taking now? Has anything changed? Has your approach changed? Is the moment different from what it was 5 years ago?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that this is a different moment. This moment, not only does it feel different, it is different. And while you can learn from the experiences of the past, you have to adopt and adapt your approach to the current day circumstances. And what I am most proud about and happy about this moment is that the discussions that we're having is not only about the community, not only about the state that we are, it's about the state that we want to be. And that, to me, that is much more important. That is the perspective that Representative Slaughter and I have taken as we're having these conversations with our colleagues. I've been a Black man all my life. I was born and raised on the south side of the city of Chicago. So I have had these interactions with law enforcement. Not all of my interactions with law enforcement have been positive. Not all of my interactions with law enforcement have been negative either. But recognizing that this moment is something that we have got to seize and take this opportunity to improve the quality our criminal justice system, of our police our police relations with our police force, so that we are leaving our communities with a better, we are leaving our generations with a better community, the one that we promised them. So as a father, I want my kids to grow up in the world that I imagine. And that's what we are working towards. So this is a very different moment, because it's allowing us the opportunity to have these discussions, but also our colleagues are seeing what we have been saying to them. They are now watching it in real time. They don't have to just live by the anecdotes that Representative Slaughter and I would tell them or recite to them or recount to them from our personal experiences. They are seeing these things play out in real time. They are now seeing individuals who are, whether it's a circumstance in Elgin where a mentally ill woman was shot and killed by police, or if there was a young man on the west side of the city of Chicago who was mentally ill, and when his family called for help, he was shot, as opposed to having a mental health professional there to help him. Or whether or not it was a young man who was autistic and also mentally challenged in Calumet City, whose family called asking for help, looking for assistance from the individuals who are supposed to be there to serve and protect them, and the person ended up dead. This is a very different moment, and our colleagues are now seeing that.
Lieutenant Governor Stratton, what does success look like for you? Like, when do you imagine we've done this reform? What does that look like?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, it looks like having people on the same page. The fact that we have an administration with the governor who leads our state, who has already stated these are the principles that we want to see happen here in the state of Illinois. We have incredible leaders like Senator Sims and Representative Slaughter, as well as the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus, and as the senator just talked about, other colleagues in the General Assembly that are starting to see why this is so important. But I think that first and foremost, the fact that we have such alignment, that this is not an example of a time where one side or one group is saying this is, or one branch, I should say, is saying this is something that's important that we need to do. We are seeing this alignment of the executive and the legislative branch. And I think that first and foremost is really important. We've been working and talking and learning from each other, and not just with each other, but learning and talking to those in community. And I think that's really important. So one of the things that, as a restorative justice practitioner and advocate, something that is important to me is that we are including the voices of those that have touched this system, those who have been previously incarcerated, currently incarcerated, those who are in communities that have suffered decades of disinvestment. These are the voices that have to be lifted up, that it is not creating policy for anyone, but allowing policy to be created by the people that have been most touched by these issues. So that is something that's important. Our JEO initiative as well, I mean, these are not new issues. I mean, we're expanding, but we're building on work that's already been done. Khadine, I was so honored to work with you and the ACLU of Illinois and many other, like 500 other advocates on voting in jail, for example, and making sure that people who are being detained pre-trial can have access to the ballot, especially right now in this election. And I want to say to you that I got an email right before this forum that's from Lake County Jail that said 80 inmates at the Lake County Jail cast their ballots today, 50 got registered today and are new voters, and they voted. And so, I think about our Restore, Reinvest, and Renew program through the R3 program, through the legalization of adult use cannabis, which is investing millions of dollars into communities. So yes, there are legislative outcomes that we want to see happen. But I think that the other things that are also important is that we continue to build upon the work, continue to lift up voices of community, recognize that there have been community organizers and advocates who have been working on these issues for a long time. And we now are all coming together to make sure that we can cross the finish line. And again, I'm very grateful to the members of the Black Caucus who are helping to lead this charge and who are making sure, not just on criminal justice reform, but in terms of all the pillars, that we are making sure we're thinking holistically about communities. It is never going to be justice is just about policing jails and prisons. Justice is about all the other things that make a community healthy. And I've talked about those earlier. So that's what success looks like to me.
Awesome. And I love that frame of a holistic approach, because when people leave prisons and jails, where are they going to live? Where are they going to work? What food are they going to eat? What resources are available for their families? So I really appreciate that from you and the Black Caucus as well. Representative Slaughter, you could be a senator at some point. One of the things I realized there's an opportunity to do policing reform again or participate in that process was lessons learned. And one of the lessons that I feel like I've learned is how important it is to have not just good policies, but accountability, like having some kind of mechanism like accountability in place. I guess, what lessons have you learned from your previous foray into doing policing reform work?
Well, you know what? I think there's been a lot of lessons learned, and I think that one of the things that's different from 5 years ago is that we actually did have bold leadership then State Rep Elgie Sims and then State Senator Kwame Raoul took a bold step with the police reform bill that they did in 2015. And so some of it too is also, like you said, lessons learned, building off of with the momentum we have, that we, in regards to some of the reforms that we have been able to put in place. I think that along with policy, there's always a discussion around government resources. So one lesson learned is that yes, there's a lot of advocacy around our policies, but then fiscally, are we in a place to pay for those reforms? How do the resources look in terms of aligning around those reforms? So that would be one lesson as well. The other thing, and Lieutenant Governor Stratton was hinting at this as well, a comprehensive approach, right? Having all levels of government, all three branches of government, because we've even seen the judicial branch also in a sort of way be connected to this work and sort of speak out a little bit. I know they've got to be impartial, but we understand that there's many different entities that are impacted and affected by these reforms, and so looking at it in a comprehensive way is extremely important. Another lesson learned is that these solutions cannot happen unilaterally or in a vacuum. We're seeing these incidences and opportunities for change in different areas of the state of Illinois, in different areas of our country. In particular, of course, we are looking at the Black community, but there's other communities in other sort of areas, robust, diverse areas, where these policies also are important. So that's another lesson learned, is to not try to make these solutions in a vacuum, in that they only impact one particular community.
Awesome. So it is time for our next poll. And this poll, rate how important this reform is to you. The reform is: people should have the ability to sue police officers in order to hold them accountable for using excessive force, failing to intervene where force is used, and other violations of constitutional rights. So similar to the one before, less important is 1, most important is 5. And the question, or the reform you're rating, is that people should have the ability to sue police officers in order to hold them accountable for using excessive force, failing to intervene when force is used, and other violations of constitutional rights. And I know that popped up. And someone has asked the question about the role of police unions. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, as well as ways for individuals to get involved. So we have 40% say it's very important, 32% says it's most important, 21% fairly important, and 6% somewhat important, 1% less important. And we have Senator Sims in the Zoom flesh now. Welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome. And somebody asked in the chat how many people are voting. We have close to 200 people here tonight, and that's a pretty big crowd. I think this issue is something that folks are very interested in, and to be able to hear from you all, I think, has been very exciting. So let's go to criminal justice. This was touched on a little bit before, but advocates and people and communities that have been harmed by the criminal legal system have been pushing and waiting for such a long time for real reform. There have been numerous task forces and commissions, including a series of recommendations from the previous governor's bipartisan commission. So I think Lieutenant Governor Stratton, you kind of talked about, we know what's on the list, but it's the idea of getting it done. And I joke with some of my advocates friends, it's like, is this going to be real this time? Like, are we going to I've had my heart broken before on criminal justice. So Lieutenant Governor Stratton, can you share why are you so optimistic? You shared a little bit about, is this time different?
I certainly believe that this time is different. I know I spoke a little bit before about the kind of leadership that we have in the state now. And again, not to Representative Slaughter's point, not taking away from leadership that has existed in the state, but looking at it across different branches and really being ready to do this. But I also know that this is a time to be courageous. This is a time to be bold. We are having conversations, for example, about systemic racism in a way, and how we're looking at systems and the racism that some of these systems have been, that has been rooted in so many of these systems. And that's going to require some real courage and tenacity to make sure that we get to that point. Conversations are being had in not just, as the representative just said, not just in big cities, but in small towns where people are saying, as they took to the streets all throughout this summer and continue to take to the streets even today, that we cannot do what we have always done. And with every new day that we see another incident, there is just a growing understanding that we have to see some real transformational change. And so I believe that this is a time where there's a level of alignment. I believe that there is some real clarity around the fact that, as somebody asked me a question once, they said, well, don't we need to collect more data? Do you feel like you're pushing this too quickly? And as Khadine, you just said, how could we possibly be pushing this too quickly? We have the data, the research has been done, we have had every task force and commission, we have talked about it. We are past that. We have to see real change, because every single day, lives are being lost, families are being destroyed, communities are being devastated. And what's most important, as I think about this, as what's supposed to be a system that theoretically is to help create safer communities, we're not seeing safer communities. So we're putting a lot of money from taxpayers into a system that is not creating safer communities. So something has to change about that. And I think we are at a place now where there are enough stakeholders that are saying, now is the time, and we simply cannot wait.
Thank you. So Senator Sims and Rep. Slaughter, I think you all have probably sponsored all of the criminal justice reform bill packages that we've seen in the General Assembly. And you've been doing it for a while. So can you share your perspective about why do you feel, if you do, that this time is different from conversations with colleagues, the moment we're in?
Well, one thing, I do want to say that, yeah, I mean, of course, Senator Sims is sponsored quite a few bills. So has Lieutenant Governor Stratton when she was in the House. However, so I do want to drill down on this. The Black Caucus in particular, but also the Latino Caucus and Progressive Caucus members, have actually put forth and sponsored a host of bills. There's several legislative initiatives that have been out there. As we start to frame up this discussion around sentencing reform, policing, and violence reduction, and I'm kind of looking at all of the different bills. There's quite a few from several members, right? And even members outside of the caucuses that I've mentioned are also taking a detailed look at these issues. So that, when you say what's different, I do believe that there is a sense, a pivotal moment in terms of where we're at with the crossroads with things. We know what we have in place is not working. Like Lieutenant Governor Stratton just said, in regards to public safety, we have decreased public safety in regards to the policies that we do have. That is reflected in the bills that we introduce, in the bills that we file. Of course, Khadine, some of these bills get to a vote on the floor. Some of them don't. But if you look at the robust nature of the the impetus, but B, those that are sponsoring these bills and what their backgrounds are, we do have some synergy with the other side of the aisle. I've had some decent conversations. I think they need to go further, of course, but I think we are in a moment where we have been able to at least broach and begin these important discussions with maybe those that have more of a conservative thought process to these challenges.
Great. Anything to add, Senator Simpson?
Yeah, Khadine, I would say that a number of our colleagues are seeing that, the truth behind the statement that the very definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. We had today in our committee hearing, we had a law enforcement led group who came and on the record said that they acknowledged that the war on drugs was a massive failure. And that's a different moment. That statement in of itself is huge, and it recognizes that we are in this space where people understand that we cannot continue to lock individuals up and expect that they're going to go into a system that that changes the trajectory of their lives, and then expect that they are going to be whole when they come out of it. Our state's constitution requires that our criminal justice system puts sentences in place based on the seriousness of the crime, but at the end of those sentences, a person should be returned to their fullest usefulness. And that's where we are in this moment. Our system of corrections is not correcting the behavior that individuals engaged in before they committed the crime. All we are doing is housing individuals, and we are not improving or addressing the behaviors that led them to the dangerous behaviors in the first place. We have got to do something different. And if we don't, we are going to continue to be in this downward spiral where we're investing in a system. We spend over $1 billion on the state's Department of Corrections. Imagine what we could do with that $1 billion if we put it into education, if we put it into treatment, if we put it into creating economic opportunities. Imagine a better system where we are investing and we are growing our population, as opposed to investing in a system that clearly does not do anything to correct behaviors or make individuals safer. We have now, and I credit Governor Pritzker and Lieutenant Governor Stratton in particular in creating systems and putting an administration in place where individuals understand that the Department of Corrections has to correct behavior and it has to invest in individuals. And that's where we are. And that to me, that is what's different in this moment.
Great. So let's go with another poll question. So this one.
I like these poll questions.
Yes, me too.
Awesome. So this one is about truth in sentencing. So the question is, people convicted of murder are not eligible for sentence reduction, and those convicted of other serious crimes are required to serve at least 85%. Would you support a proposal to allow people in prison to earn credit that shortens their time to 75%? So yes, no, or unsure. And a lot of folks had questions around length of sentencing, parole versus mandatory supervised release. And so let's see what the poll says. 85%.
Oh, unsure, 15%.
unsure 15%. And for people who are unsure, we will educate you about the issue so you could be with us, the rest of the 85% of folks. So let's do one more poll. This is about drug offenses. So possessing even a small amount of any illegal drug is a felony punishable by 60 plus years in prison. Would you support a proposal reforming drug sentences by making small scale possession a misdemeanor and decreasing the length of sentences? So yes, no.
Didn't even have to finish that one.
The length of sentences. So possessing even a small amount of any illegal drug is a felony punishable by up to 60 plus years in prison. Would you support a proposal reforming drug sentences by making small scale possession a misdemeanor? And it's 100% yes. Feel free to use these poll results as you talk to your colleagues who are concerned about the issue. Let them know the people are with them.
Right.
So speaking of opposition, we've had a ton of questions about the role of what are obstacles, and people were very interested in your thoughts around police unions. What's their role in reform? How can we reduce the power of the FOP? And we also had a question about how the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights plays into policing reform. Who would like to take that on?
I don't mind. I mean, you know, we've got, think about the law enforcement Bill of Rights. It was created by what is, for anyone who is familiar with the American Legislative Exchange Commission, or ALEC. This was an ALEC sponsored bill. So for those who do not know who ALEC is also it's the proud owners of Stand Your Ground. So you understand where their perspective lies. So the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights came about in the 90s to create this narrative that what law enforcement officers were under attack, and it was to create a mechanism which protected law enforcement and created a shield around them. Well, there are, as I mentioned earlier, there are other professions who are licensed. There are but no other profession has the ability, but law enforcement, to use deadly force, often with impunity. And what we have seen, the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, there are things that have been built into statute where, and let me speak specifically to collective bargaining issues, where collective bargaining agreements supersede state law. That where else do you see circumstances which exist other than in this arena? So if you have a profession where you are able to use deadly force, I think there ought to be some discussion of what is appropriate for those officers and for that profession. And I think it is reasonable for us to examine the lengths that we go to make sure that that profession has the ability to use deadly force with impunity. I think that's reasonable.
And so for people who just listen to your answer and they hear about collective bargaining and this Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, and they may wonder, so are you saying is policing reform and accountability for law enforcement impossible because of those obstacles?
No, I'm not saying that. And that's why I say this moment is different.
Yeah.
This moment is different because now you have so many individuals who understand that the laws that are in place, the reason that you see an officer leaning on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, because for so many times that was the result of numerous instances leading up to that point. And many of our colleagues, not just in Illinois but around the country, are seeing these realities, and they understand now that there are laws that have been put in place that sound harmless enough on the surface, but the unintended consequences have been to build this wall of protection around individuals who sometimes don't deserve it. Now, there are some law enforcement officers who do deserve protection, but there are individuals who are who are protected, who have engaged in behavior that is counter to not just departmental policy, but the bounds of human decency. And those individuals remain protected when they shouldn't be. And those laws that have been put in place have helped contribute to that.
Right. Khadine, we're just jumping in. I mean, real quick. I mean, we certainly honor, respect, admire police officers, and we believe in unions and their objectives. I think we just don't feel that it should cultivate a environment where police can operate with impunity.
Great, thank you.
And if I can just also add just another angle when we talk about some of the obstacles, it's really these myths and really this sort of shame that is perpetuated when we talk about our justice system and people who have touched our justice system. Many of you in this forum tonight probably know that about nearly 1 in 3 people in our country have been impacted by the criminal justice system, whether that is having been arrested or having been in jail or having been incarcerated in a prison. But we still don't talk about it like that there's so many people who have touched this system because it's like a scarlet letter. We know that in so many of these instances, it creates and causes such a feeling of shame in the way that we talk about people who have been in the system or have been previously in this system, or even children who have had parents in this system. There's so much shame that's attached to it. So if you are stopped and frisked, even though you're the one that's been stopped and frisked, there's a feeling of shame to it. If your friends say, hey, where's your dad, or where's your father or your mother? And you have to say, well, you know, they're somewhere locked up, and there's a sense of shame there. Or if you're accused of something that you didn't do, and the feelings of shame that people end up living with, and it's attached to the way that we talk about people who have been incarcerated, that, you know, we act like these are kind of that othering that we do. That's somebody else. They're other, they're over there, when really it is our family members, it is our neighbors, it is our co-workers, it is people in our communities. And it's a big obstacle to criminal justice reform, not just the policy itself, but the myth of what it means to be justice involved. And that's why I'm so committed to continuing to lift up the voices of individuals who have touched this system.
Thanks. One of the things that I hear from folks is that, why is it so hard? These are basic, it's like when we think about the reforms we're talking about, they're transformational in some ways, but in some ways they're not. They're just basic things. You should not kill a person who is running away from you, law enforcement person. Somebody should not be in prison for the rest of their lives with no opportunity for rehabilitation or to earn sentencing credits. Can you share, as legislators, former legislators, what's the opposition you hear from people in Springfield, and what do you need in order to get the votes to make these proposals reality? A lot of folks on the call may not understand how Springfield works, so I think sharing with that can be helpful.
You know, Khadine, I always, in talks like this, I always do a mini civics lesson, and it's a calculus that Lieutenant Governor Stratton has done. It's a calculus that Representative Slaughter and I do on a constant basis when we are trying to figure out how to pass legislation. Because there are 3 numbers that matter: 30, 60, and 1, or 2 numbers that matter: 36 and 72. So 30, 60, and 1, you have to have 30 members of the Illinois Senate vote for a bill for it to pass out of the Illinois Senate. 60 members of the Illinois House have to vote for it to pass the Illinois House, and the governor has to sign it. In the alternative, 36 members of the Illinois Senate have to vote for a bill, and 72 members of the Illinois House have to vote for a bill for it to have a supermajority. Now, let me back up for a moment. There are 10 members of the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus in the Illinois Senate. And I said there were 30 votes needed. So 20 other members need to come on board for the Illinois Legislative Black Caucus to pass anything out of the Illinois Senate. There are 22 members of the the Black Caucus who are in the Illinois House. So remember, I said we need 60 votes to pass anything out of the Illinois House. That means there are there are 48 other members who need to come on board for us to be able to pass something. So in order for us to be able to do that, then we are going to have individuals who understand and are educated on the process on the issues that we are trying to forward. And from there, that's where it's so important, critically important for us to have these discussions with our colleagues so that they know what we are trying to accomplish. And when you talk about things in relation to what is good for Black people, it's not what is good for Black people is good for all people. When Black people thrive, the entire community is successful. So that's where we are having these discussions in terms of where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? These are, and folks, I have folks all the time say to me, well, why can't the Black Caucus just pass these things? We certainly, there are many issues that we would certainly want to pass, but we can't snap our fingers and make these things happen. It requires us to work with our colleagues so that they understand what we are trying to accomplish. They understand how this impacts our communities. They understand how it impacts their communities, because there are Black people in every corner of this state. There are Latino people in every corner of this state, and we're not going anywhere. So in order for us to be the Illinois that we want to be, all of us have to be working and growing in the same direction.
Right, certainly. And just to even elaborate on that, it's really important. And Senator Sims, I think you did a great job in the civics lesson. Thank you. But there are a myriad of different factors that come into play. Senator Sims and also Representative Lieutenant Governor Stratton has hinted on. But when you look at institutional racism, when you look at the prison industrial complex, when we talk about addressing incarceration, just for example, ultimately you're talking about de-incarceration. Hopefully, maybe this may be even manifest in the closure, for example, of prisons. Well, for some of these districts, some of these areas of the state of Illinois, that's a major economic engine, unfortunately, but it's a major economic engine in some areas of the state. So it's not an easy discussion, but these are some of the hard discussions that we have. Secondly, I'll just put another one out there. Lieutenant Governor Stratton has been absolutely amazing on this. Restorative justice practices and victim services. A lot of times when you talk about criminal justice reform, sometimes that the victims aspect of this gets lost. I've seen it certainly been propped up by those who have pushed back against criminal justice reform. What about the victims? And how does this work? So having that critical conversation oftentimes comes into play. And of course, the overall fiscal discussion, when you talk about opposition, are these unfunded mandates, et cetera. These are just some of the moving parts. These are just some of the moving parts that come into play when it comes to, as Senator Sims said, getting the numbers that we need, 30, 60 in one. But a lot of moving components. And then when you want to put together a larger package, one that the Black Caucus is embarking upon now, you even have even more parts. I mean, a lot of the framework that we're putting together for sentencing reform, policing reform, and violence reduction have a lot of different it's a multifaceted solution. And so time, energy, effort, it takes all of that. There's 118 representatives, 59, right? Senators, or is it 59? And so it's a lot of work.
And I know time is of the essence, and we're wrapping up, but I just want to also just say really quickly, telling the stories and building relationships is always going to be important. Just like building relationships is important in organizing, it's important to share stories about our respective districts. I know that's how I felt as a legislator, because people don't know what it's like when you are seeing the level of disinvestment, when you live in a whole different part of the state. One of the things that we did through our Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative is we launched a podcast called Walk, Listen, Learn, Our Journey to Justice. I invite all of you to check it out. You can, anywhere that you listen to podcasts or look at my social media. Today's episode was actually Senator Elgie Sims talking about sentencing reform. We have topics of school to prison pipeline and health equity and juvenile justice and restorative justice and community organizing, all to help people understand the stories and the why behind the work. So I invite everyone to listen and look out for Walk, Listen, Learn, Our Journey to Justice.
So,
Khadine, there was a question in the chat from Priscilla talking about the more than just the Black Caucus cares about this issue, and I totally agree with you, and that's the discussion that we've been having. It is good to have allies and allyship in this moment. When you are trying to get to that 30, 60, or 1, or 36 and 71, you are going to need allies. And that's why we talk about that allyship and needing individuals who are like-minded. But as Representative Slaughter mentioned, sometimes these are pocketbook issues for individuals also. One of the hearings that we had in our committee talked about prison gerrymandering, where for the purposes of the census, individuals if you are incarcerated, you are counted where you are incarcerated for purposes of the census. Well, as Representative Slaughter talked about earlier, there are so many individuals who are housed in the Illinois Department of Corrections facilities who are going to return home. Well, the monies from that individual will go to the community where they were housed, where they are going to return to communities, where they were going to return to other communities. We have to address these fundamental unfairnesses that are built into our system. And that's the only way we're going to truly get to justice.
So to end, and I think it would be really helpful. There are a lot of folks who are like, what can I do? So these are folks who are advocates who have a Springfield presence, people who do not, folks who are just listening and they feel like the time is right, they want to do something. So maybe if you can close with what are the concrete things that people can do to help activate other legislators to know that this issue is important to them, and to help you get to 60, 30, and 1, though I like buffers. So 61, 31, 1. Who wants to start?
Lieutenant Governor, ladies first.
So what I would just say again is thank you again to you, Khadine, for moderating, and thank you to the ACLU of Illinois and to all of you who joined this call, because I know you joined because you are interested in helping to create a more just Illinois. What I would suggest, and I'll be really brief, is I'd say, number one, make sure that we hear from you. Email, call, send a letter to your representatives, to your state representatives, to your state senators, send them to me and our Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative. Hearing from you about the kinds of things that you want to see, just like the polls we had today, are incredibly important for us to be able to say the people stand with us. Secondly, know that we hear you and we know that our communities deserve better. And so we encourage you to fight alongside of us. Let's keep doing this together. And then finally, I know all of you know this, but you can go to ilga.gov and file a witness slip. So when you see legislation like the legislation that's being proposed, the bills that are being proposed, you can, from virtually, get online, say, I support this, or I oppose it if it's something you oppose, but you can do that, and those witness slips come up in committee hearings, and they are an incredibly powerful way of making your voice heard on a piece of legislation. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Khadine and ACLU of Illinois, thank you also for having me. It was an honor to be on the panel. And yeah, I mean, I think you want to keep on advocating. I think participating and collaborating on forums, on panels is always great. Continue to reach out to your legislators. And when it comes to, state government, realize that, it's not just Chicago and Cook County. Reach out to elected officials throughout the state of Illinois, central Illinois, downstate Illinois. It's important that we've got a robust conversation permeating through all of the state. And then also understand that this is the people's government. It's not the elected officials' government. We just represent the people. And so with that being said, please be encouraged that we as a people can impact policy. You can impact policy. You have the the right, but also everything within yourself, within your organization, your family, to impact change and to be a participant. And so just encourage everyone to continue to be an advocate and to continue to roll your sleeves up as we continue to push forward. Thank you.
And again, let me add my voice to those thanking the ACLU of Illinois for this informative panel. And Khadine, thank you so much for moderating. Kayla has dropped. If you have not been following the chat, please look in the chat. Kayla has put some information into the chat. One, about how to find your state legislator, and two, about how to file that witness slip that Lieutenant Governor Stratton talked about. What I would say to everyone, there are three things that I would leave you with in terms of this process. One, educate yourself on the process. Know who the players are and what you are trying to accomplish. And that starts at home, but it does not end at home. So you have to know who your local legislators are. Your state senator, your state representative, your alderman, your county commissioner, know who they are so that you can participate with them. But then secondly, advocate for those things that that are important to you. If no one knows what you want if you do not speak up. So your voice is critically important to this moment. So we need you to advocate on behalf of the things that you care about. Third, participate. When legislators have events, go find out what is going on in your local community. Democracy is a participatory sport. It only works if the people of our government participate. So you cannot, and your participation does not start and end with voting. It has to continue. That is the health of our democracy. That is the oxygen of our democracy. It is the people. It is people continuing to participate in our democracy. So participate, go, make sure that you are engaged on an ongoing basis, because that is the only way we're going to get the democracy and the government that we want. So first, educate yourself, advocate, and then participate. So those would be the things I would say to close out.
Thank you so much for making the time, for being here, for all of the work that you do. And I know that sponsoring these bills, being a leader on these issues can sometimes be difficult, especially if you're painted as soft on crime or you don't care about other people. So I just want to recognize and lift up the work that you all are doing. And I want to end with Samuel Smith. I think he captured the best way to end this conversation, describing the three of you: intelligent, smart, informed, and committed Black public servants. Beautiful. Thank you all. So thank you very much, and look forward to talking to you soon.